Mold exposure is one of the biggest things affecting your health, but no one is talking about it. And I'm saying this from experience, as my husband and I got horribly sick from living in a mold-infested house just for a few days. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly why mold is so dangerous, and then we'll look at what your options are if you, God forbid, find yourself in a similar situation. But before we get to the health effects, I need to explain why mold is more dangerous than most people think. Mold is actually an ancient problem, so ancient that there are references to it in the Bible and evidence of techniques to combat it in the buildings of ancient civilizations in Egypt and Israel. So when we are talking about mold, we also need to talk about mitochondria, which are the tiny organelles living inside our cells that are turning the food we eat into energy. It's believed that mold and mitochondria share a single-celled ancestor and that they evolved alongside each other over billions of years. However, there is no love between these two, as mold is the enemy of our mitochondria. With mitochondria being part of our makeup, our being, when mold attacks it, in return, it is attacking us. Now, regarding different types of mold, not all of them are actually harmful. In fact, some are used in medicine and are actually very useful to us. So the toxic molds that we need to worry about are Cladosporium, Penicillium, Fusarium, Aspergillus, and Stachybotrys. However, not all the species within these types cause severe health problems in humans, but many are toxic enough to cause some serious illnesses. So how do these attack mitochondria? Well, as you may have heard, mitochondria are the powerhouses of cells. They produce something called ATP, which is our primary source of energy. This energy is the foundation of our very existence, without which we wouldn't be alive. ATP powers nearly every vital process in our bodies, making it indispensable. Molds, on the other hand, produce mycotoxins, which cause oxidative stress and interfere with how mitochondria functions. And when these toxins disrupt mitochondrial function, it can lead to widespread cellular dysfunction with various severe health issues. Now, that's all very sciencey, but basically, you have mitochondria in your body and mold comes to attack it, it's basically slowly destroying you. The biggest point to drive forward the most here is that no one is immune to the dangers of mold exposure. So even though people have different sensitivities to mold and some show symptoms sooner, it's still hurting everyone equally. Being exposed to mold is damaging your body in the background without you even being aware of it, at the very level of your being, regardless of immediate symptoms. So when you do see mold somewhere, it's crucial to make your way to the closest exit in an orderly fashion. Also, people who suffer from allergies, asthma, chronic lung illnesses, or weakened immune system are at the higher risk of developing infections from mold exposure. And then to top that off, babies, children, pregnant women, and the elderly are also more susceptible to mold-related health issues. So next, let's look at a few sneaky ways of how you can be exposed to mold without you even realizing it. Mold exposure can happen in three main ways. The first way is inhalation. This is the most common one, and it happens when you breathe in mold spores. This was how we became seriously sick in just a matter of days, but I'll touch more on that later in the video. The second way is ingestion. This is when you ingest foods that have mycotoxin-producing molds. A few examples of food that are the most common culprits for this are grains, cheese, nuts, almonds and peanuts are notorious for this, and coffee. Any food that has visible mold growth has been fully contaminated, so you do need to throw it away. And the final way of mold exposure is through skin contact. By touching mold, you can start to see physical symptoms on your body both immediately or in a matter of days. Speaking of symptoms, let's take a deeper look into what those actually are when you're exposed to mold. This might sound a bit much, but people who are sensitive to mold can develop symptoms immediately after inhaling even a small number of mold spores, which was the case for my partner Andri. This is their body's immune response to mold exposure triggering an allergic reaction. However, people who are less sensitive to mold may only start developing symptoms even months later. And in my opinion, this is what makes it extra dangerous, as you'll be exposed to mold for way longer. Although research into mold exposure is still ongoing, symptoms can manifest differently for everyone. And this all varies based on the type of mold, how long the individual was exposed to it, and their sensitivity. And it's also the reason why most people often mistake mold exposure with other reasons for being sick. Some of the lighter symptoms to worry about are bloating, lack of focus, fatigue, or poor sleep quality. The more serious symptoms include memory loss, depression, muscle pain, immune system complications, and long-term breathing problems, which can persist even after leaving a mold-infested environment. Women can even experience irregular periods and struggle with fertility or difficult menopause. But one of the worst effects of mold exposure, in my opinion, is the neurological issues. The cognitive impairment, the memory loss, difficulty concentrating, confusion, and disorientation, the brain fog, and the headaches. Andrei experienced a sense of complete detachment, a feeling he described like he was a passenger in his own body, not fully in control of his movements. He felt like he was actually sitting 2 steps back from his own body, and like he was losing his mind and getting weaker by the day. It's important to monitor your symptoms when moving to a new environment. If you're suddenly experiencing some inexplicable symptoms, but you've also recently changed office spaces, moved into a new home, or are staying somewhere new on a holiday, it might be due to mold exposure. So pay attention to your body and what it's telling you, and take it seriously. Although there's a long list of other triggers that can make a person sick, don't overlook the possibility of this being caused by your environment. And remember that long-term exposure to mold can have very long-lasting effects on your health. So always keep this in the back of your mind whenever you change environments, because unfortunately, mold is often hidden or overlooked. Okay, let's move on to the idea of mold allergies. Can people actually be allergic to mold? Yes, they can. And you'll see this when people experience immediate allergic reactions in the presence of mold. Mold spores drift in the air, and inhaling even a relatively low amount can already cause symptoms. However, being allergic to one type of mold doesn't mean that you will be allergic to all of them. And this is why it's actually quite hard to tell if you're allergic or not. Mostly because you might also be sensitive to a variety of other things, from pollen to animal fur. So pinpointing mold allergy specifically is just pretty difficult. So long-term exposure to mold will also make any allergy symptoms a lot worse. And the only working solution here is fixing your environment, and it's the only one that will really stick. Now, all of that we've talked about so far brings us to another big question. How do you recover from mold exposure if you've already been affected? I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. Unfortunately, recovery is very difficult and takes a long time because of the extensive damage that mold exposure can cause to various systems in your body. It can affect your gut, your immune system, respiratory system, nervous system, and lead to severe neurological issues, cognitive impairments, and chronic fatigue. I mentioned how badly Andrei got affected by mold earlier, so here is a bit more context for that. In 2021, Andrei and I moved to Portugal and found a stunning, freshly renovated home by the ocean. However, a week later, we packed up our bags and evacuated the place. In just 8 days, Andrei went from a healthy, active, clear-minded person to someone who could no longer walk up the stairs. It got so bad that he even started to lose his eyesight. Within just a few days, his health deteriorated because this house was infested with toxic mold. And although we couldn't see it at first, we knew there was mold in the home because he's sensitive to it and knows the symptoms. But even for him, it still took a few days to connect the dots. After a bit of digging, we found out that a pipe had burst and the home had experienced extensive water damage before it got renovated. So the kitchen wall and the upstairs bathroom were both infested with toxic mold, black mold, by the time we moved in. It was hidden behind cabinets, built-in kitchen appliances, and behind the walls. It was invisible to the human eye without removing the fixtures. We then escaped that home a week after moving in and moved to another freshly renovated place 1 street over and stayed there for 6 months before new symptoms started popping up. And then it turns out that house also had developed mold. The difference there was that we were exposed to lower levels, but for a longer period. What happened the second time was that although the house was again freshly renovated, there was rising damp. So although it wasn't moldy when we moved in, during the cold and rainy season, it slowly kept getting moldy over time. Andri struggled with a few long-term symptoms after that, such as lack of energy, getting winded quickly, difficulty recovering from exercise, and constantly having eczema. After now almost 3 years of actively dealing with this and trying to heal himself, Andri has gotten his energy back, but still occasionally gets the odd symptom that tries to pop up, like eczema during allergy season, which he never had before. Regardless, we learned a lot through this whole ordeal, and we've got a few steps to share with you on how to recover from mold toxin exposure. Just a quick disclaimer here, this is not medical advice, and you should always consult your healthcare professional before starting any medical intervention or treatment. What we do recommend is that you find a functional medicine professional who is experienced with mold and can guide you on your own journey of recovery. So with that said, here is what we've learned about how to recover from mold exposure. Step number 1, get rid of mold. You'll never recover unless the mold is removed. So this is where you need to start on your recovery journey. For small sources, you can remove the mold yourself with things like vinegar or hydrogen peroxide. For larger areas, or for when the mold has infested the structures of the home, you'll need to call in professional help. However, the problem is that mold is not easily removed, and remediation often leaves spaces worse off than before because of the harmful chemicals that they use. We have a full video on how to clean mold, which you can check out here. In some cases, your best option might be to pack up and leave, because the only way to remove all the mold would be to break down the house to bare structures and rebuild it. Pro tip, if you have recently purchased or rented a home and discovered there was mold, check your local laws. In many countries, you are then protected for these cases, and if the damage is too big, you might even be able to return the house. But let's hope it never comes to that. Step number 2, functional medicine and natural recovery. Healing in natural ways is important to us, so we started off our recovery journey by going on a mold detox protocol, where we used things like glutathione and organic binders. Remember, mycotoxins cause oxidative stress that interferes with mitochondrial function and cellular processes. Using glutathione reduces oxidative stress and improves immune function. After taking these for just 2 weeks, we already felt a difference. We continued taking supplements and focusing on holistic approaches for months, but while I got better, Andri was still struggling, so I decided to reach out to a few functional medical professionals. Functional medicine is personalized and focuses on the root of a problem, not just treating the symptoms. So we ran some tests for Andri and found high levels of certain types of mold. And some other in-depth analysis also suggested that Andri was exposed to mold earlier in his life, which could have also contributed to the onset of his multiple sclerosis. Then after this, for the next 6 months to a year, he was on various strict protocols of functional and repurposed medications and different strict dietary plans, from GAPS to autoimmune paleo, all of which did finally bring big improvements in his health. So step number 3, pharmacological approach. Now, although it is possible to heal mold toxicity in your body through lifestyle, supplements, and natural medicine, it will be a long and difficult road. When we looked at this earlier, it was more black and white. Natural good, allopathic bad. After working with some really top-level functional doctors, however, I now understand the need for pharmacological interventions when done correctly. So there doesn't have to be the distinction between natural and pharmaceutical drugs. Sometimes pharmaceutical drugs are necessary, especially when they're functional. The specialist we worked with said that yes, of course, we can do it the natural way. However, that would have been a way slower route back to good health. And both of us are sure glad that we listened to his advice on many things. So don't close the door on other healing approaches if you're like us and want to live a holistic lifestyle, because I doubt we would be where we are right now with our recovery if it weren't for giving the functional repurposed pharmaceuticals approach a go. Again, all of these bad health symptoms come from mold being all around us. So if you want to know exactly how to snuff it out, check out this video where we explain some common locations where mold might be hiding and a few uncommon ones that are just as dangerous.